If you have been listening to this podcast for a while, or maybe just in my monthly giving universe, you probably don't need another overview of why monthly giving matters, right? You already know that. That's not the problem. The problem is it's July and maybe your monthly giving program still isn't built or the place that you want it to be. So on July 21st, I am running a free 60-minute live training. I will walk you through the 5-step framework behind the monthly giving builder live. You will see exactly what it looks like when an organization is going from stuck into launched. I'm talking about program named, landing page written, talking about ask sequenced, donors are retained. This is not theory. This is not inspiration. We are doing live prompting in this session. So if you have thought about monthly giving more than once and it still just isn't built, and if you know your end of year is coming and you want recurring revenue to be not just part of that, but like a big part of that, and not just one-time gifts, and done waiting for the quote unquote, I'm using my air quotes here, perfect moment, the link is in the show notes. It's July 21st. Or you can go to positiveequation.com and click the link at the top. I hope to see you there. Shilpa Alva is on a mission to fix one of the world's most fundamental problems, the fact that hundreds of millions of people don't have access to safe, clean water. 15 years later, she built Surge for Water into a women-led nonprofit operating across 12 countries, reaching hundreds of thousands of people with sustainable, clean water, sanitation, hygiene, menstrual health solutions. And she hasn't just built the programs. She has also been building up her voice, showing up as a speaker, a storyteller, and a public advocate for global water equity in ways that have really directly expanded what Surge can do. So today in this discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about the business principles that she carried out of her prior corporate world and into the nonprofit sector, what it looks like to scale this organization through some real crisis and the inflection points along the way, and how to be a leader and tell your story in all different stages. So please welcome Shilpa to Missions to Movements.
I didn't know about this whole brand marketing, like invest in fundraising, right? Like I just came into it very naively because I didn't have the nonprofit experience. So knowing what I know now, right? If we did that up front, I think that would have brought some of that growth early on. In the early days, from a program perspective, like we were chasing the numbers, right? Like we wanted to reach like hundreds of thousands of people because we thought that's what donors would want to hear. And we worked in 12 countries. And now we are truer to who we are, right? We're not after those numbers. We're after depth and like true impact. And the story is very different, and we can stand up to that story.
Okay, so your background is really interesting, and I think we need to start there. You started in chemical engineering, and you were also in the corporate business world before founding Surge for Water. And I'm always curious, for those that do make the shift into a nonprofit leadership role, and there's always this conversation around like nonprofits are businesses, like A, do you agree with that? And B, like, have there been principles or things that you've intentionally brought with you from your prior like career experience into now leading Surge for Water?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I do agree to a certain extent, right, that nonprofits are like businesses because there's definitely aspects of it that need to be run the same way. I think there's different ways of running businesses. If you're running it compassionately and with humanitarian agendas, then sure, there are similarities. I'd say for me, the experience I had in chemical engineering, the business world, there were definitely several elements or experiences that carried over. So from the engineering side, that was more my education, little less the sort of the work experience. But in like the chemical engineering space, it's all about like processes and, you know, process controls, and everything is so structured, right? And what goes in must come out, and all of these kinds of like technical things things I cannot remember anymore, but the training was with me, right? Before intense undergrad years. And that structure, like till today, like with Surge, we're dealing with the global water and sanitation crisis, right? Billions of people don't have access to these basic needs. And the issues are very complex, and it's easy to get overwhelmed and just feel like that it's so daunting to address it. But the chemical engineering training like helps me break it down into small bite-sized pieces that you can treat like with a simple process, right? And you
Yeah.
break it down into like a simple mass balance or something like that. And it's helped, right? That engineering like discipline has helped take really complex things and like look at it in just in smaller pieces and fix that, right? Or address
Mm,
that, even if you can't fix it. So I'd say that's the engineering side. The business side, I think that's really, I'm fortunate that I had that experience because my business experience allowed me at a young age to have a global department that I managed, right? And help me with global like cultural exchange and like learning. And I also owned my own P&L, right? So I had to create budgets and
budget.
balance books and right and do all of those financial pieces. So it was really easy for those pieces of it to come into running my own organization and understanding, right, that books need to balance, that you need the money to spend the money and you need to have
Yep.
like money to invest in future months. And the cash flow statement is still the statement I look at the
That's right.
most, right?
That's right.
Right. And grew up that way because I was looking at it because I managed department, I managed salaries and staff and
Yeah.
expenses. And the difference was in the business, well, I didn't have to raise that money because I
Right.
had an
Right.
expense account, like it was raised by the sales department. So now, yes, adding the additional complication of right now, the sales and the marketing, which I didn't have in the
The
business side.
fundraising is now your task
Yeah.
of the funds, which I do
Yeah.
want to ask you about. So, like, obviously, the world water crisis is huge, and there are many organizations in that work, in that community, that collaboration, that ecosystem to try and make a shift there. And I think a lot of organizations listening could probably relate to this, that in their cause area, there's a multitude of organizations doing like minded things. Where have you found your story that is distinct and unique that shines through, that captivates your supporters?
Yeah, I think in the early days, it was definitely about people meeting us, like me, my, original, the starting board, like people, because we started in a very grassroots way. And I think when you have such a big issue, when people can trust you, right, the leaders of the
Mm-hmm.
organization and the people running it, it's a lot of the initial support were friends, family, colleagues, right, of myself, but also like board members who were, are involved even till today. Until today, that's a lot of the connections, right? People want to know somebody part of it when you're an org that's small and growing. So I'd say that's one aspect, but now that we're going broader, right? And, have foundation and grant money and corporate money, the story that's resonated is our model, right? That we work like we have two aspects that we talk about quite heavily. It's where everything that we do is truly community owned and led by women. And the global water crisis disproportionately impacts women and girls. But the people
Mm-hmm.
running these organizations don't look like me very often. And I did not grow up in an environment that I had to carry water long distances, but I menstruate and you deal with water
Yeah.
in a different way. And I think just having that understanding and like being in a space where at the leadership level, board level, but also in the communities and at the grassroots
Yeah.
level, it's a lot of women that are in front and, with in the management positions and the education positions, even in the infrastructure positions. I think that like resonates with people, right? Like we're solving the issue with
Mm-hmm.
the people closest to the challenge. And in our opinion, that's really the best way to do it. And people can resonate with that message. So once you look at our model and how we do our work, I think that's helped us create like a niche within the space.
And what I love about it is that you haven't been, yes, you're leading things operationally, but like you're here, you're speaking on podcasts, you're positioning yourself publicly as an advocate. I talk about this all the time. And like you just said, like it starts with the trusted leader. Maybe you always knew this, but like that your voice was you're like, no,
Yeah, I didn't always know that.
was like crucial to the success of the organization. Like, did that become more intentional to speak and speak on behalf of the organization? Like, how have you structured that for yourself as the leader?
Yeah, so I think when, just being a founder and how passionate I am about this work, like if anybody just spoke to me, then of course, like I'm the evangelist for this kind of work, right? And I know that passion comes through. It comes through when I'm recruiting board members, volunteers, or staff, like new staff or consultants, like that comes through. But this transition to like being more public about it, more intentional, like just even this opportunity to speak with you, Dana, like that was definitely driven by my board and like specifically Sarah on our board, who's like our marketing chair, and actually she's now our board chair right now, which is very much like, Shilpa, you're our biggest asset. Like we need to invest in you and your
Yeah.
voice because
Yeah.
what you're doing with me and with others needs to be heard. Like that warmth, that energy, that passion needs to be heard at a wider space. So that was intentional. It is a strategy from like, as we look at our growth
Mhm.
and plans, but it definitely didn't come from me because, you're just like any opportunity to speak about what you love, like great, but like to be intentional about it takes a little bit more thought, right? And structure about how you're going to do that and what spaces are you going to be in. And so that's what we're working on now, but it took time. It took time to get us there. And I'd only say like, we've been around for over 15 years and we're probably only got to the space in the last few, right? Because so it took us a
Mm.
long time. And I'd recommend that leaders do that earlier if they
Yeah.
realize there's so many platforms out there now to be able to
I
do it.
know. I was going to ask you that. So, how has your schedule or your balance of time changed? I love this because, and she listens to this podcast, Megan, I'm shouting you out, a fellow founder of a board chair of an organization that is very much the public advocate within the United States. And her organization is Ethiopian based. And I mentioned you have to get out at these like Ethiopian functions in the US, like to raise, we talked about who her donors were. And it's like, you need to be out there. You need to be in person, like having the conversations. Like you can only do that. Like, what are the things that, and I think this is probably what Sarah on your board was like, you can distinctly do this because of your story and who you are. Like they can't just go and do that for you at the level that you can. So like, how has
Correct.
that changed? What did you step back from to be able to like step into this kind of new, I wouldn't say new, but like another way
Evolved.
of your
Yeah.
evolved role? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm still figuring it out. So I would say that we're in it now and we're transitioning in it. And I think even as, so we have like, quite a bold, like 2030 strategic plan. And in that plan, I'm required to do even more of it, right? And step more into this like advocate, fundraiser, awareness builder. And so that's still in flux, but I would say that the biggest pieces have been, like releasing more. Again, when you're a founder and you start an organization, you're doing everything, right? You're doing so
Mm-hmm.
much of the admin, the operations, the finance. So I'd say it's letting go of like several of those other pieces. And honestly, the people who've taken them over are so much better than me at it
Yeah.
anyways, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
but also we had to grow to the size to have those resources, right? It's only about a year ago that we had a global programs wash manager, right? Like, so in our space, it's called wash, and she's amazing, right? But like until then, like that was also a big part of my role, right? Or so just having different people
Yeah.
take on different aspects that are not my strong suit
Yeah.
has really helped.
Since you have started to implement it, have you started to see the ripple effect yet?
Yes, I wouldn't say ripple effect, but we can see the effect. And I think the
Yeah.
ripple is still coming, I would
Yeah.
hope. We always have these conversations like, this is interesting because like whenever you invest in marketing and you invest in these things, the direct correlation is hard. Like it would be
Mm.
very interesting that if we're speaking and someone reaches out and is like, hey, I heard you on this podcast. And because of that, I want to become a big donor. Like that doesn't
Yep.
happen, right? As much. But what happens is like when we have this conversation and okay, we publish on our LinkedIn, it's on our website. So we have a landing page now on Surge's website that shows all of these. And now our development consultant will use that, right? To go out
Mm-hmm.
there, or we can use certain links to certain podcasts or certain articles to get a certain
Yep.
point driven home. So like those kinds of things, I think it's building the legitimacy, the credibility
Yeah.
over multiple pieces. And so now if I show up in conference settings, like people will come up to me and it's like, oh, like Search seems to be doing really well. I'm like, we were always doing that, but now we're just speaking
Too
about it
about
more,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Coincidence or not correlation. Like we've also doubled in size in the last couple of years, like in revenue. So
Wow.
it
Amazing.
is happening in parallel, but it
Yeah.
is hard to like specifically isolate, like, yes, because I'm doing this. We've been doing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do believe like in our strategic plan, the investment in me continuing to be an advocate and a public speaker and speaking and being in the right rooms is still very much part of our plan. So we still see the importance. It's
Yep.
just a little hard to draw that direct correlation.
Yeah, sometimes. I do love what you said about having the media page on your website, sharing it on LinkedIn, creating that presence there. Like it builds, it works. I'll never forget when I was attending a conference and had really been working on LinkedIn. And this was probably like 3 or 4 years ago now. And a lot of the time you like, it's crickets on some channels, right? And you're like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
nobody's listening. And multiple people are like, are you the Dana Snyder on LinkedIn? And I was like, I'm a Dana Snyder on
Yay.
LinkedIn. I was like, that's hilarious. And I was like,
Love that.
I think so. I'm sure there's multiple Danas with this name, but I was like, that's hilarious that that's how you're thinking
Yeah.
of me.
Yeah.
Let me know if this resonates with you. You know monthly giving works. You are not confused about that at all. But what's stopping you from building it and growing it is that you don't have a clear system, no real starting point or framework. There's just a bunch of ideas that maybe are scattered across Google Docs or workbooks from a bunch of different webinars and blog posts and some really good intentions. And now, even if you got the structure part out, you're not totally sure how to make the ask. So, outside of an event or outside of a campaign, how do you actually invite someone into recurring giving without it feeling awkward? And on top of that, you might be feeling stretched. Competing priorities, a lot of current programs. There's just been no time to really sit down and feel like you can build something new from scratch. And if any of that sounds familiar, that is exactly who I built the monthly giving builder for. Now, what's inside is my 5-step framework system that takes you from we really should do this to fully launched. I'm talking naming your program, building the foundation, auditing your current donor experience, setting your gift tiers. It writes your landing page copy for you in your voice, not generic. It builds your ask sequence for emails. It shows you the touch points that you're already sitting on and just need to activate, and puts a real retention plan in place. So the donors that you're working so hard to acquire, you keep. This is the tool that makes it possible. Okay. You're not rebuilding anything. It's giving you the prompts, and then it is giving you customized, personalized output. You have a monthly donor tracker, so you're tracking your growth. It's giving you the next steps for 30, 60, 90 days. And the best part, it's $49.99 a month to get started, or only $499 for the year. Either way, a lot of cases, this is one new monthly donor covers the cost of this in 2 months. So if the only thing for you that has been missing is a clear way to do this, please go get it. monthlygivingbuilder.com. Again, $49.99 a month, $499 for the year. I will put the link in the show notes. I want you to have the best summer building out your program so that your end of year looks significantly different and you are heading into 2027 with a great monthly giving community ready to support you and your impact. So you mentioned that you've been operating for 15 years. Congratulations. One,
Thank
that's
you.
phenomenal. But that also means you have seen a lot of definitely economic shifts. I mean, we're going through a big one now. A lot of donor trends. There's been a lot of different crisis situations that have happened, evolving conversations. You mentioned women and girls, a lot around equity and equality. When you zoom out over the 15 years, what do you think have been maybe for you defining inflection points that really moved you to scale to where you are now? And that, I don't know if that's 3 or 4 or 5, but like, are there key moments
Yeah.
that you think were really definitive for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started Search for Water, I was doing it nights and weekends, first of all. So for the first 5, 6 years, actually. So we're over 15 years old now. I think we're actually 17. But for the first 6 years, I was still in the corporate world. So I was running the organization really as like, a hobby, I want to say.
Yeah.
That was when we were raising funds, but we were just existing to provide a few wells and just like very, very status quo in the way we were. And that was one of the points when I made the leap into leaving making that transition properly, leaving the corporate world and going into running Surge full time. That was definitely a significant inflection point because that was probably the other time in our organization where we doubled and tripled in size in a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that was a very specific response to going all in, right? Because it makes a huge difference when you're able to
Huge.
invest.
Yep.
So that was one in the early days, which is, now 10, 11 years ago is when I did that. And then I'd say when I went in full time, then the other piece that the first thing that I did, and this maybe has to do with my engineering background. Well, definitely, because I didn't, marketing and fundraising came later to me. So it's kind of interesting.
Mm,
Like I first focused on the operations. Like I went in and I was spending time in country with the partners, learning about how to do this work on the ground, right? And developing the model we have today. Different approaches. That was just all I knew and how I
yeah.
would do it. I probably would have tried to raise the funds first and now, but back then, and I used my own money to do it, right? Because I came from the corporate world. So like that was an
Yeah.
investment that I made in the organization. Once that came to life and we had that infrastructure, which keeps evolving because you have to do that in a complex environment. And then we were able to tell people like that helped, right? That helped get us to the next growth point. Then we went through the pandemic, like every other
Mm-hmm.
nonprofit that happened. And that wasn't that long ago. And I would say when that happened, we weren't the org we were today, even if it was only 6 years ago, but like we questioned, like, can we survive this? Right. Because it was really
Yeah.
hard. That was the first time in our entire history that we had a 10% reduction in revenue. And like that ended up being like not that bad because so many organizations, businesses had to shut down
Yeah.
through that period. So going through that really helped us to like really like look closer at like processes and sustainability and financial
Mm-hmm.
sustainability, right? Like things that we may have taken for granted until that point. And I'd say coming out of the pandemic, right, and having stronger, like going through that was when we really saw like the significant growth that we had, like true investment in, that's when we started to invest in like our brand, our story and fundraising. And we saw the greatest growth like after
Yeah.
those periods. So we done the operation side, we went through a crisis, then we intentionally invested in marketing and development. And
Yeah.
now I think we're seeing, when I talked about doubling in size in the last couple of years, like I know we're seeing the benefits of those investments now.
Absolutely. It's interesting. One of my very first episodes, Paige from the Birthday Project, talked about during the pandemic, they also, because there wasn't a lot going on programming wise in the
Yeah.
US, that they took a step back and they invested in their brand. They're like, let's redo our brand. And that rebrand got the attention now because they looked legitimate. It was stunning from these new corporate partners that wanted to now be associated, found out about them. And they're like, it was wild. Like, it's not where
Yeah.
we had pictured like funds
Right.
necessarily coming from, but this was the genesis because we invested in this. So it's really interesting whenever I hear that. It's very true. I think there's a lot of resistance of like, well, what's the ROI of brand? What's the
I
ROI of
know.
redoing our
No, we went through
logo?
that. Yes. We went through that on our board, right? Because their
Yeah.
board members are like, well, but yeah, like we did it. We've actually through our history gone through probably 2 or 3 brand refresh, one like interns doing in your early days and then
Yeah.
one that a pro bono firm did, which we love. The brand doesn't last forever, right? The world's changing, right? And like
Yeah.
has in the
Yeah.
space change and you change, right? Your org
That's right.
changes and evolves. So
I always like to ask this too is like, if you were launching now, knowing everything that you know, and you talked a little bit about like marketing, fundraising, but is there anything else that you would do differently? I'm just thinking of the orgs maybe like in your first 3 years that you would change or do to really like accelerate healthy growth and sustainability and
So part of me is like, we're meant to be on the journey we're on, and every lesson
totally.
learned is part of who we are. But yes, of course, like I just like, as I mentioned, like I didn't know about this whole brand marketing, like invest in fundraising, right? Like I just came into it very naively because I didn't have the nonprofit experience. So knowing what I know
Yeah.
now, right? If we did that up front, I think that would have brought some of that growth early on. In the early days, from a program perspective, like we were chasing the numbers, right? Like we wanted to reach like hundreds of thousands of people because we thought that's what donors would want to hear. And we worked in 12 countries and
Mm,
now we are truer to who we are, right? We're not after those numbers. We're after depth and like true
mhm.
impact. And the story is very different and we can stand up to that story. So realizing that early on might have helped, like, even focus us, right? And be more laser focused initially. But again, how would you know that if you didn't go through the
How
journeys
do
you
you know?
went through?
Right.
So,
I love
so
that. There was a great, I think it was on LinkedIn that I read where it was somebody talking about they realized that they needed to put together their annual impact report, but they didn't have the time to do like the glossy pages and the deck and all the numbers. And so they're like, instead, we did a really simply, we focused on a couple individual stories. and how those resonated so much more than saying the big stats because it was readable. It was able to be understood and it was so core to what the work was that they were doing instead of it like glossing over a summary of things or having like a list of like a bunch of donors names and all this stuff. And it was like we just didn't have time to do that and we had to get really scrappy. And surprisingly, like that worked even better than like what we traditionally think. So I think it goes back to like what you're saying is what's the truest like authentic voice of the mission, the organization, and those one-on-one storytelling moments that can be so powerful. I love the work that you're doing and that you have stepped into this role to amplify the work and that the board is really supportive of it and helping to hopefully like make those opportunities. What would you say to somebody who's like on the fence that is in a seminar role but hasn't taken like, oh gosh, I don't know if I should be on panels or on a stage or doing podcast episodes or whatever. The stages look in this is a
Very
stage. There's
different.
very different stages,
Yeah.
but to
Yeah.
kind of take that first step.
I think for me, and everyone's journey is different, right? Like for me, I've always enjoyed and been really deeply grateful for the opportunity to share Surge's story, to share this work, right? Because especially when you work in international environments, right? Like we have the honor to represent these voices of like the communities that we work with. So I've loved every opportunity, of course, right? There's like when you're on bigger stages and bigger rooms, like I get nervous and, all those things happen. But if that's the right thing for your
Mm,
organization's message to amplify and it's just about starting and like finding those opportunities and finding what's comfortable with you because you're absolutely right? Like maybe it's just posting more on social media on whatever channel that is. Like that's the first step. So each one, like there's so many different paths to get there depending
yeah.
on the audience you're going after. Each of us have to figure that out for our own orgs. But for Surge, like this has been one of the paths and it's, as we continue to do it, right, it continues to help elevate and we're all after the same thing, right? We want our work to be amplified and we
Mm-hmm.
want that to lead to increased awareness and funding. And
That's
this
right.
is one of the paths that can get us there.
Can you share as we wrap, has there been an amazing moment as a speaker out there that has just like wowed you or made you nervous or something, or even a funny story, like something to leave people with?
Honestly, like, so I just spoke at a university last week. So regardless of what rooms I'm in, if I could be in like rooms with like, huge corporate events and I'm speaking on stage and those are amazing to have that opportunity. But my favorite moments are with students,
Yeah.
especially like college kids who are still trying to figure out their journey
Mm,
because I just feel like that's such a, like, if you talk about ripple effect, like honestly, like to me, one of the most beautiful things is that if something I could say has influenced someone else who's trying to figure out what
yeah.
they want to do in their lives. And I could have helped. I could have helped with that path, like helping ignite that purpose, take that
Yeah.
purpose longer. And like having conversations after that when students have reached out and been like, hey, can we talk more? Because I'm on this path, I'm on this journey. Or sometimes years later, people have reached out and it's like, I heard you on this podcast. I heard you speak in this room and I've started an org and I need help. Like things like that to me are because that's the true ripple effect. Like, yes, water was my calling and like what I'm doing with Surge was mine, but there are so many other amazing
Yeah.
things that can be done out there to amplify good in the world, especially at a time like now. And so
Yeah.
it doesn't have to just be a student, but it could be anyone, right? Who could
Yeah.
resonate. Like that's magic.
Yeah. That's so funny. I did that very early on. And you probably just like made their eyes light up like, what? Like, this is possible? Like, I could
Yes,
do something like this?
exactly.
Just thinking back to sometimes when I've shared people like different parts of my career and they're like, you did what?
Right.
You
Yeah.
never know what the opportunity is going to present you with. Like, connect with
Yeah.
everybody and help open the door for others after you too. So, this has
Exactly.
been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your advice and expertise and wisdom with everyone. Where can they connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm most active. So you can connect with me personally on LinkedIn. And otherwise, Surge for Water is on all the channels. So that's to connect with the organization, where
Awesome.
that would be the other way.
Thank you, Shilpa, so much for being here today. And yeah, everyone go reach out to her.
Yes.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Missions to Movements. If you enjoyed our conversation and found it helpful, I would love for you to take a moment to leave a review wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps us reach more change makers like you and continue bringing impactful stories and strategies to the show. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button too, so you'll never miss an episode. And until next time, keep turning your mission into a movement.